Israeli air raids hit Yemen's capital amid rising conflict. Egyptian aid convoy arrives in Gaza as the Palestinian presidency warns Israeli policies aim to perpetuate aggression and starvation. Welcome to our special coverage on Qnews, where we tackle the latest developments in the region and around the world. Let's start our coverage with the latest developments in Yemen. Israeli strikes have hit the Yemeni capital Sanaa, and Israeli media reported that the Israeli Air Force launched a series of airstrikes on the Yemeni capital, targeting Houthi positions. According to Reuters, the strikes focused on areas near the presidential complex and missile bases. An Israeli military source confirmed that the attacks were carried out in response to missile launches by the Houthis. Their strikes also hit civilian facilities, including the central Houthis power station and an oil company in Sanaa. Israeli sources identified the presidential palace as a primary target, with at least 3 sites being bombed in total. The Israeli Occupation Army has confirmed that its air force conducted strikes on Yemen's capital Sanaa, targeting key military and infrastructure sites. The operation focused on a military complex within the presidential palace, 2 power stations, and a fuel storage facility. Army officials said that the strikes were in response to repeated Houthi attacks on Israel and its citizens. Over 10 fighter jets took part in the operation, launching more than 35 missiles and shells. The army stated that the bombing of authorities' sites, like the presidential palace, was intended as a direct message to the Houthis. Military sources denied that assassinations were part of the operation. A senior Houthi official has condemned Israel's airstrikes on the Yemeni capital Sanaa, saying that the attacks targeted densely populated residential areas and unstaffed government buildings, including the presidential headquarters. The official accused Israel of trying to compensate for its military losses and labeled the targeting of civilian sites as a war crime. He warned that Houthi forces would escalate their operations and could strike deeper into Israeli territory. The official also claimed that air defenses intercepted part of the Israeli assault and warned that if U.S. involvement in the strikes is confirmed, Houthi forces would retaliate by targeting American interests. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al Ahram Weekly Editor-in-Chief, Mr. Khalid Dawood. Welcome to Qnews. Now, Mr. Dawood, how do you view today's Israeli strikes on several areas in Yemen?
Well, good evening, Hala. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.
Obviously, Mr. Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, wants to continue to flex his muscles and display that Israel is still able to reach out in its strikes far outside its borders, especially after the missile that the Houthis fired towards the Israeli airport of Ben Gurion yesterday, which was, according to military experts, slightly different, more advanced kind of missile that when it reaches the airspace of the Israeli side, it breaks into smaller missiles, which makes it more difficult to intercept those incoming smaller missiles, and causing perhaps damage that the Israelis did not expect. So for that reason, Netanyahu this time and his war cabinet decided to carry out an expanded military strike against Yemen, not just the usual ports or airports, but also the presidential palace and some power stations. So it's a continuation for Netanyahu's display of force and claim that it's like a kind of a superior military force in the region.
Could we see new U.S. strikes against Yemen in the coming period, in your own opinion?
Well, I mean, the United States, the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has made their own try at trying to defeat the Houthis. And there was a ceasefire agreement that was reached between the two sides after 1 month of heavy American strikes. And since then, we have not heard any reports of U.S. readiness to join Israel in striking targets within Yemen. But at the same time, we can see that the Israeli Prime Minister is working in total tandem with the American side. So if he feels that he needs some help on that level, maybe he will ask for U.S. military support. But so far, there doesn't seem to be signs that the Americans plan to repeat what seemed like a failed experience. At the end of the day, what the Americans did, what the Israelis have been doing over the past 2 years since the Houthis decided to strike at Yemen as a sign of support for the Palestinians in Gaza, is they never managed to achieve their goals. At the end of the day, the Houthis continue to be in control of the big parts of Yemen. They actually their popularity have increased after this military confrontation with the U.S. and Israel. And even after today's expansive strikes, nobody knows, or it's very difficult to estimate whether this would contribute to the main Israeli goal, which is to force the Yemenis, to force the Houthis to stop firing missiles at Israel. Of course, we hear statements of defiance from the Houthi side, and that nothing will stop them from bombing Gaza, and that's actually the truth, which is that over the past 2 years, despite very heavy military strikes from the United States and Israel, the Houthis continue to fire missiles and even more advanced missiles towards Israeli targets.
Are we likely to witness renewed Houthi escalation against Israel in retaliation, of course, to Israel's bombing of Sanaa?
Most military experts expect that to be the case. Not like necessarily an escalation in a manner that was not seen before, but definitely judging by previous Israeli strikes against Yemeni targets, whether in Hudaydah or in Sanaa, the Yemenis have always hit back with firing a number of missiles towards Israeli targets. So, I mean, and there's no sign yet that the Israeli strike today, despite the fact that it inflicted heavy damage, is going to lead the Yemenis to deter the Yemenis from hitting back at Israel. So the answer is probably yes. The Yemenis are going to retaliate to that kind of expansive military attack today Israel conducted.
Why did Israel choose this particular timing to strike targets in Sanaa in Yemen? Is it a way of diverting attention from its vague and ambiguous stance towards a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, I mean, what you're saying is totally right. Of course, at the time, Israeli Prime Minister is facing a lot of pressure to end the war in Gaza and to refrain from carrying out his irresponsible plan to add to the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza City by invading the city and forcing the displacement of the population. There are more than 1 million people. He probably needs to distract attention from deep internal divisions, the demonstrations by the families of the Israeli prisoners held by Hamas, by carrying out another external military adventure. But the only thing that would not likely work is that this is the scenario we've seen before over the past 2 years. So, I mean, resorting to flexing muscles and bombing Yemen, bombing ports in Yemen, airports, presidential palace, power stations, are not necessarily going to change the Israeli public opinion or divert their attention from the extremely direct problem that they have, which is dealing with the situation in Gaza, the starvation, the international isolation. So I think it's very difficult to expect that this kind of, showy military strike is going to sway the Israeli public opinion or end their internal divisions towards the war in Gaza.
Mr. Dawood, is Israel using these strikes to pave the way for its plan to occupy the Gaza Strip by claiming that it faces threats from Hamas's allies, that it is only defending itself? Usual claims that we hear from Israel?
I think the situation is relatively separate because, as I've mentioned, I mean, again, since this war, Israeli genocide war started against the Palestinians in Gaza, I mean, we've seen repeated attacks by Israelis and later by the American administration, whether the former Biden administration or the current Trump administration, against targets in Yemen. So, I mean, it's not likely that it's going to help Netanyahu by claiming that Israel continues to be under threat. The key threat for Netanyahu was Iran, which is seen as a sponsor for the Houthis in Yemen. So definitely, he prides himself for being able to deal a very heavy blow to the Iranian nuclear sites and also top Iranian military leadership. But at the same time, he will always claim that he's fighting wars on 7 fronts, but he knows very well, and the Israeli public opinion knows very well, that the key problem facing them is extremely deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and the useless, aimless war that he has been conducting over the past 2 years. I mean, we go to side wars, we go to wars in Lebanon, we go to wars in Yemen, and the world is asking that it must now come to an immediate halt.
Mm-hmm. Could these strikes indicate the possibility of a new military confrontation between Israel and Iran, as you just mentioned? Because Iran would be part of the game. I mean, this is a clear escalation.
I mean, already the Israelis have been claiming that the missile, the advanced missiles that hit Israel yesterday is basically Iranian technology, and that it was used but also by the Iranians during the confrontation in June, the so-called 12-day war. So, I mean, Israel is not going to miss an excuse in order to strike Iran again. And unfortunately, there have already been reports coming out from Iran saying that they're expecting a renewed Israeli and American military strike, especially after they boast about, developing new missiles and even that their own stock of enriched uranium has not been reduced to the levels that do not pose a threat in terms of the ability to construct a nuclear bomb. So we cannot exclude this scenario. The Iranians, after the experience of the 12-day war, I mean, are definitely on the alert, and they are ready for a repeated scenario in case, again, Netanyahu wants to get out of his internal problems by starting an outside confrontation. Although, again, we are talking about 2 long years, Hala, I mean, in which almost everything was tried. I mean, occupying and reoccupying Gaza, striking Rafah a few times and never achieving their goals, striking Lebanon on a permanent basis. But at the end of the day, I mean, wars, Israel cannot stay in a state of permanent war forever, and the Israeli public is going to understand sooner or later that the party that's getting them into more and more problems worldwide and more isolation are these policies of war adopted by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was Mr. Khalid Dawood joining us from Cairo. He is Al Ahram Weekly Editor-in-Chief. Thank you so much, Mr. Dawood, for joining us here on Qnews. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the latest developments in Gaza.
والله العظيم ولا حبة رز، والله العظيم ولا حبة عدس. ما فيش أكل، ما فيش شرب، عندي بنت 2 سنين ونص، صارت تطلع.
A new Egyptian Red Crescent humanitarian convoy has departed for Gaza through the Rafah border crossing, delivering vital food, medical and essential supplies as the enclave faces catastrophic deprivation. With Gaza's population requiring 7.5 million meals a day, Egypt stands ready to flood the territory with urgent relief. But Israeli-imposed restrictions are systematically blocking aid entry. The United Nations has officially declared a severe famine, with 500,000 Gazans enduring catastrophic hunger, labeling the crisis as a global shame and a man-made disaster. UN officials accuse Israel of deliberately obstructing humanitarian access, warning that starvation deaths may constitute war crimes and urge immediate opening of all the crossings to avert further tragedy. Meanwhile, Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has voiced deep alarm over escalating reports of famine in Gaza, urging urgent international action to halt Israel's grave violations. In a call with his German counterpart, Johan Vadeful, Abdelati emphasized Israel's legal duty to ensure humanitarian and medical aid as the occupying power. The Egyptian foreign minister outlined Egypt's efforts to deliver aid and preparations to host an international conference on Gaza's recovery post-ceasefire. He stressed the critical need for Israel to accept the ceasefire proposal, warning that continued military escalation would only worsen the crisis and undermine peace efforts. He also called for renewed negotiations on Iran's nuclear file to bolster regional stability. And amid Gaza's ongoing suffering, Egypt emerges as the lifeline, delivering aid, healing the wounded, and mobilizing nationwide efforts to sustain hope for the Palestinians. The Palestinian presidency has warned that Israeli policies aim to perpetuate aggression until they impose conditions allowing continued extermination and starvation. It condemned Israel's defiance of international calls to halt the war. The Palestinian presidency urged the U.S. administration to assume responsibility for Israel's actions, cautioning that such policies risk triggering widespread chaos across the entire region. The statement highlighted the urgent need for global intervention to stop Israel's offensive, emphasizing the grave humanitarian and regional security consequences if these aggressive measures persist unchecked. Hamas has asserted that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's approval of the Gaza occupation plan, despite their acceptance of mediator proposals, reveals his intent to obstruct any agreement. Hamas confirmed that they agreed to a partial deal and showed readiness for a comprehensive one, yet Netanyahu rejects all solutions. Hamas added that Israeli and American admissions identify Netanyahu as the primary obstacle to detainee exchanges and ceasefire efforts. Former U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller acknowledged Netanyahu's repeated delays and new demands whenever agreements neared completion. Hamas insists that a ceasefire is the sole path towards securing detainees' release and holds Netanyahu fully responsible for their fate. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram managing editor, Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin. Welcome to Q News, Mr. Izzeddin. How do you view Egypt's role in providing urgent humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip?
Thank you for having me in Q News. The Egyptian role is actually escalating with the with what's happening in Gaza and with the suffering of the Palestinians. Today, they started the process of sending them a new aid. Today, actually, they sent around 120 aid convoys to be able to cover even the slightest part of the Palestinians' needs, especially with the occupation forces still blocking the aid entering Gaza. Yesterday and on Friday also, the occupying forces blocked aid, and Egypt started today sending new convoys. And so Egypt's role is very supporting, and it is very important either on the level of the actual government or diplomatically also, which is them entering into negotiations to lessen the suffering of the Palestinians, especially with providing them with humanitarian aid, with food and with fuel as well, as we saw in Rafah crossing. And so even though there have been some obstacles, planned obstacles, especially in Karam Abu Salam corridor, and allowing them to have a small amount of the aid, but Egypt still insists on keeping up its crucial role in helping the Palestinians. And also Egypt keeps on condemning what the occupation forces are doing, that have turned Gaza into a war-torn city, and a city full of hungry people, and with the UN's declaration, this is an unprecedented famine since the World War. And so what the occupation forces and Israel is doing is a war crime, and using aid and starvation as weapons against the civilians. And also Egypt plays a huge role on the negotiations level as a main negotiator and a main party of facilitating negotiations, and also it keeps condemning and rejecting the war and the strikes on the Palestinians, and it also rejects and condemns the strikes that target forcing the Palestinian South.
Mm-hmm. So what is your comment on Egypt's role in the ceasefire negotiations in Gaza?
Egypt is putting a great effort and are always looking for positive initiatives. Even either Israel sticks to these truths or not, and it also welcomes the help from the countries around the world, especially the Western countries and the European countries. And so we see lots of countries supporting the ceasefire, and Egypt plays its leading role. It is very, very important to reach an agreement, and with its leadership role also in providing them with aid through the Rafah crossing, either through the Rafah crossing that was targeted by Israel, or through Karim Abu Salam crossing, even though they have faced lots and lots of obstacles, and also the checks that they do for the convoys. And they are also trying to bring point of views together, and they have reached a their diplomacy have actually convinced Hamas to accept Witkoff's proposal, but unfortunately, the occupation forces have actually disrespected and ignored this. And so, once the negotiations are somewhat successful and they are close to having a deal, and Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't respect it and actually stops it. In addition to what he does with the military operations and advancing them as he wants to do in a week or 10 days, as he intends to take over Gaza and have a full-on siege, as the military forces have done in the past few days by taking control of lots of areas in the Gaza Strip and forcing the Palestinian south.
Mm-hmm. So will Israel carry out its threat to occupy the Gaza Strip in the coming period, fully occupy Gaza Strip in the coming period?
Unfortunately, they keep on, they are going on with their plan, and Israel is manipulating them politically by justifying by justifying its actions because of not reaching any agreements and wanting to get its prisoners back without any intentions of stopping the war in Gaza or withdrawing from it. And for days now, they're according to some Israeli media, there have been some. They are advancing some areas in Gaza to keep on their operations, and also with the start of the first month. And yes, they will start the actual operation in the middle of the next month. But I actually think that after they have their backup and adding to.
Yes. So how do you see the major disagreements between the Israeli chief of staff and the far-right ministers in the Israeli government?
Unfortunately, the political side or the head of administration is pressuring them and ignoring some laws and rules, military and safety rules actually. And so he has a goal, which is to maintain the far-right administration, the current one, and going for a war. In addition to being a main obstacle in the process of negotiating and having unreal justifications. And so eventually the president can actually take him off the chair, like what happened before. And so it is the upper word goes to the political side and not the Israeli chief of staff, even though the military is the one having the operations. And so the pressure from the Israeli president, which aims for keeping up his administration and it not failing with the elections coming, especially with the elections coming. Will keep on with the massacres and the genocide that are happening in the Gaza Strip.
Well, that was Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin joining us from Cairo. He is Al Ahram managing editor. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our special coverage for tonight. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. I'm Hela Al-Hamalawi. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.